My name is Lee Braggs, and I'm a resident of Glens Falls. Have been for the last 40 plus years or so. Say their name so appropriately. You know, Eric Garner, TRAYVON Martin, and all the other countless individuals that have been victims of police brutality in this country. Yes, we should say their name, but we also would like to say, Mr. Coughlin, you don't realize what you did. You were just a burning ember in the forest. You and the other 4 officers that started this massive blaze in the forest that's going through this country as we speak. I'm a product of the South. I lived here in Glens Falls for the last 40 years, but I'm a product of Jim Crow South and a product of forced integration of the school system in the South. And that leaves a lasting stain on me. But I vowed then that, you know, as I graduated from high school, that wherever I would make my home, that it would be somewhere where I could make a difference. And it just so happened to be here in the greater Glens Falls area. I had no idea that that's where it would be, but that's what happened. And people got to realize, and especially current leadership, that this country was built by all, for all. And let's not be afraid of the differences. Let's embrace the differences. And the current, you know, situation with, and this is not saying that all law enforcement are the same, you know, it's that minute percentage that sticks out when something happens. But yet and still they are supposed to uphold the law of the land for all citizens of these great United States. That's what makes this country so great. We do have laws, and we have to abide by laws. We do understand that. But the law and the justice system has to be equal and just for all, and especially people of color. Not just, you know, just driving while black, you know, and driving while brown, being in the wrong place while black. It's stuff. You say, why does this happen? Does this actually happen here in upstate New York, here at Adirondack Community College or in the greater Glens Falls area? That stuff just happens in the larger cities, the Chicago's, the Houston's, and the New York Cities. But you walk in my shoes long enough, each and every day you will find that it happens here in small town USA also. And that's why we got to be forever vigilant. And it's strictly up to this generation to carry on the torch that's been lit, so vividly lit in recent months, that they should carry the torch and prepare to and continue to fight for equal justice for all.
George Floyd, 46. George Floyd died May 25th, 2020, after a police officer in Minneapolis kneeled on the neck of the 46-year-old handcuffed man who was lying face down on the street. The entire episode was recorded on video by one of many bystanders who heard Floyd telling police he couldn't breathe, repeated pleas that went ignored. The 4 responding officers involved were fired as protesters demanded they also be charged with Floyd's murder.
Yasin Mohammed, May 9th, 2020. A police officer in Georgia shot and killed Yasin Mohammed on May 9th in the city of Claxton. A press release from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation seemed to blame the shooting on Mohammed, who was accused of throwing rocks at a deputy from the Evans County Sheriff's Office. According to the press release, in the hours before the shooting, Mohammed attacked an officer with a pipe as well as attacked an ambulance. When the deputy who killed him responded to another call about Mohammed being on foot in the middle of the road, the press release says Mohammed threw rocks at the deputy. Mohammed then charged the deputy with a larger rock, at which point the deputy discharged his firearm, striking Mohammed, the press release said. Mohammed died at the scene at the age of 47. A reporter's investigation into the shooting has begun.
Sean Reed. Sean Reed's death on May 6, 2020 was live streamed on Facebook during a foot race running away from police, who tasered and shot and killed the unarmed 21-year-old black man who who was also a U.S. military veteran. With the Facebook Live still recording, police can be heard joking about how Reed would need a closed casket funeral.
Stephen DeMarco Taylor. The death of Stephen DeMarco Taylor, who was holding a baseball bat and having a manic episode when he was tasered multiple times and fatally shot inside a California Walmart on April 18, 2020, was captured on video by a bystander. The lawyer for the family of Taylor, who was only 33 years old and a father of 3, claims the shooting was excessive since officers had already tasered him.
Breonna Taylor, the 26-year-old African-American emergency medical technician, was fatally shot by Louisville Metro Police Department, LMPD, officers on March 13, 2020. 3 LMPD officers executing a no-knock search warrant entered her apartment in Louisville, Kentucky. Gunfire was exchanged between Taylor's boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, and the officers. Walker said he believed that the officers were intruders. The LMPD officers fired over 20 shots. Taylor was shot 8 times.
William Green, age 43. Green was reportedly pulled over for driving erratically, handcuffed and placed in the front seat of a police cruiser in Prince George's County, Maryland, on the night of January 27th, before a police officer entered the car and shot him while he was restrained by the cuffs as well as a seatbelt. Police have tried to criminalize him as a suspected drug user, but either way, Green was already restrained when police shot him.
Darius Tarver, 23. University of North Texas student was shot and killed by police in Denton, Texas on January 21st, 2020, during a confrontation at an apartment complex. According to the cops, Tarver was approached by responding officers after residents called 911 about a guy who was banging on doors and yelling for someone to let him in. Tarver's father, a McKinney Police Department chaplain, was allowed to see the body cam from the shooting and believes it sharply contradicts officials' narratives, civil rights attorney S. Lee Merritt said.
Jamie Johnson, December 14th, 2019. Jamie Johnson, a student at the historically Black Florida A&M University, was killed by police in Jacksonville on December 14th, 2019 after a questionable traffic stop. Police say that Johnson was armed and tried to flee in his car, but his parents say he was legally licensed to possess a firearm in an open carry state and that he never would have broken the law. There were no immediate charges against the officers involved, and civil rights attorneys Ben Crump and S. Lee Merritt have been retained by Johnson's family to investigate.
Michael Dean, a 28-year-old father, was shot in the head by a trigger-happy Temple Police Department officer, Carmen DeCruz, in Texas on December 3rd, 2019. A preliminary autopsy report declared Dean's death a homicide, but as of December 20th, police had not released any other information in the suspected cover-up. Dean's mother said a police detective initially told her that her son didn't pull over right away, and when he exited the car, he walked toward the officer who then shot.
Miles Hall, a 23-year-old man who suffered from mental illness, was fatally shot by Walnut Creek Police in San Francisco on June 2nd, 2019. Hall's family claims they called the police because he was behaving erratically while running outside with a metal pole. Instead of de-escalating the situation using crisis intervention training, which the officers have received, the man was fatally wounded. The family has filed a wrongful death lawsuit.
Jonathan Hart. Jonathan Hart was a 21-year-old Black gay man who was homeless in the Los Angeles area. On December 2nd, 2018, he was reportedly shot and killed in the back by a security guard in a Walgreens. He was allegedly shoplifting, but eyewitnesses said that he was not stealing.
Emantic E.J. Fitzgerald Bradford Jr., November 22nd, 2018. Emantic Fitzgerald Bradford Jr., better known as EJ, the son of a police officer, was an active duty officer for the Army, home for Thanksgiving. Emantic EJ Fitzgerald Bradford Jr. was shot by police while trying to save people from a shooter at an Alabama mall. The military veteran was killed on Thanksgiving night.
DeAndre Ballard, age 23. On September 18th, 2018, the North Carolina Central University student was fatally shot on campus by a security guard with the North Carolina Detective Agency. The guard claimed he shot the unarmed 23-year-old in self-defense.
Botham Shem Jean was killed on September 6, 2018, when off-duty police officer Amber Geiger entered his home and shot him to death in Dallas. Her excuse: she said she thought it was her apartment. She was later charged with manslaughter 3 days after the shooting, and on October 2nd, 2019, was sentenced to 10 years in prison.
Robert Lawrence White, June 11th, 2018. On June 11th, Robert Lawrence White was fatally shot in Silver Spring, Maryland. A minutes-long confrontation ensued between Montgomery County Police Department officer Anand Bajujar over a suspicious person reported in the area. White, who was unarmed, began walking away from the scene. The officer fired several rounds and Lawrence was killed.
Maurice Granton, age 24. On June 6th, Maurice Granton, 24, was reportedly unarmed when he was shot in the back and killed by police in Chicago. The police report accused Granton of producing a weapon, but body cam footage appeared to show there was no weapon. The family filed a lawsuit against the Chicago police in July of 2018.
Philando Castile, July 6, 2016. Philando Castile, a cafeteria supervisor in St. Paul, Minnesota, was shot and killed by police officer Geronimo Yanez during a traffic stop for a busted taillight in Falcon Heights on July 6, 2016, with his girlfriend Diamond Reynolds having live-streamed the horrific moments after his shooting on Facebook Live.
Sandra Bland, 28, July 13th, 2015. Bland was pulled over for a minor traffic violation on July 10th by State Trooper Brian Encenia. The exchange escalated, resulting in Bland's arrest and charge for assaulting a police officer. The arrest was partially recorded by Encenia's dashcam, a bystander's cell phone, and Bland's own cell phone. After authorities reviewed the dashcam footage, Encenia was placed on administrative leave for failure to follow proper traffic stop procedures. She was found hanged in a jail cell in Waller County, Texas on July 13, 2015, 3 days after being arrested during a pretextual traffic stop. Her death was ruled a suicide. It was followed by protests against her arrest, disputing the cause of death and alleging racial violence against her.
Freddie Gray, 25. Freddie Gray died in Baltimore on April 19, 2015. A week after he was arrested, dragged into a police van, restrained, and suffered a spine injury during a brutal incident involving 6 officers that amplified police and community tensions. Anthony Hill, age 26. Anthony Hill was an Air Force veteran, was unarmed and naked when he was killed at 26 years old in March of 2015. Former officer Robert Olson was found guilty of aggravated assault, 1 count of making false statements, and 2 counts of violation of oath by a police officer, but not murder or manslaughter.
On November 22nd, 2014, Tamir E. Rice, 12 years old, was fatally shot by Cleveland police at a park outside of a recreation center after he reportedly reached for a fake pistol, an airsoft-type gun replica of a semi-automatic handgun that shot pellets, which cops mistook for a weapon.
Michelle Cousseau was killed on August 2014 after police officers were sent to her apartment as part of a court-ordered mental health pickup. According to police, she wouldn't open her door, so they had to force their way inside. Officer Duprat has said he saw her holding a hammer above her head in a way he deemed threatening, and that he shot her in self-defense.
Michael Brown, 18, August 9th, 2014. Michael Brown, an unarmed Black teenager, was fatally shot on August 9th, 2014 by Darren Wilson, a white police officer in Ferguson, Missouri, a suburb of St. Louis, prompting nationwide protests and agreement with the Department of Justice for police reforms after a blistering DOJ probe uncovered routine racist practices among police.
John Crawford III, 22. August 5th, 2014. John Crawford III was fatally shot on August 5th, 2014, after police responded to an emergency call about someone waving a rifle, a BB gun, that Crawford carried at a Walmart store in Beaver Creek, a suburb in Dayton, Ohio. Gregory Hill Jr., 30. January 14th, 2014. Gregory Hill Jr. was killed in a matter of seconds after police shot him in his own garage in Fort Pierce, Florida, on January 14th, 2014. Reports said local residents called police with a noise complaint because of the loud music being played in the garage. When Hill opened the garage and saw it was the police, he tried to close it before police shot him in the head and elsewhere. Hill's family has maintained he was unarmed when he was shot. The family of Gregory Hill was awarded a grand total of 4 cents after a federal jury concluded in 2019 that the police involved in the shooting did not use excessive force. Jonathan Farrell, 24, September 14th, 2013. Unarmed former Florida A&M University football player Jonathan Farrell was fatally struck by 10 of 12 shots fired by Charlotte-Mecklenburg police officer Randall West Carrick after the cop responded to a home where Farrell had supposedly gone for help after a car wreck just outside of Charlotte on September 14th, 2014.
TRAYVON Martin, 17, February 26, 2012. TRAYVON Martin was shot and killed by Neighborhood Watch volunteer George Zimmerman on February 26, 2012 in Sanford, Florida, sparking a movement against excessive force and police violence.
Manuel Loggins Jr., February 7th, 2012. Manuel Loggins Jr., an unarmed U.S. Marine sergeant and married father of 3, was fatally shot by a deputy after he reportedly crashed through a gate while driving an SUV with his daughters inside the vehicle at a high school parking lot in San Clemente, California, during the early morning hours of February 7th, 2012.
Julius Johnson, age 23. In 2009, the unarmed 23-year-old was killed by Officer Charles Anderson, who claimed he was attacked and feared for his life. Johnson's sister told detectives that she heard her brother plead for his life before being killed, but she was charged with lying to police and was sentenced to 3 months in jail. 10 years later, a KKK application was found framed in Anderson's home.
Catherine Johnston, 92, November 21st, 2006. Catherine Johnston was an elderly Atlanta, Georgia woman who was killed by undercover police officers in her home on Neal Street in Northwest Atlanta on November 21st, 2006, where she had lived for 17 years. 3 officers had entered her home in what was later described as a botched drug raid.
On May 16, 2003, a dozen New York City police officers stormed an apartment building in Harlem on a no-knock warrant. They were acting on a tip from a confidential informant who told them a convicted felon was stealing drugs and guns from the 6th floor. But there was no felon. The only resident in the building was Alberta Spruill, a 57-year-old employee described by friends as a devout churchgoer. Before breaking in, the raid team set off a grenade. The boom stunned Spruill and she fell to the ground. Once they had figured they made a mistake, the officers attempted to help Spruill to her feet, but she went limp and slipped into cardiac arrest. She died 2 hours later. The ensuing NYPD investigation found that the alleged drug dealer was arrested days earlier and had been in police custody ever since. The informant had lied. The officers who conducted the raid had done no investigation to corroborate the informant's tip. By 2006, New Yorkers filed more than 1,000 complaints about botched raids, a 50% increase over 2002, the year before the raid on Alberta Spruill.
The shooting of Eleanor Bumpers by the New York Police Department occurred on October 29, 1984. The police were present to enforce a city-ordered eviction of Bumpers, an elderly, disabled African-American woman, from her public housing apartment in the Bronx.
In September 2013, the New York Daily News published, "It was after 2 a.m. when transit cop John Caustic descended into Manhattan's First Avenue subway station. On the Brooklyn-bound L platform, Caustic saw a tall, thin, black man scrawl RQS on the wall in foot-high letters with a felt-tip marker. The cop did his duty and collared the graffiti tagger on that morning 30 years ago today, September 15th, 1983. He later said the man was resigned, almost cordial. He said, 'Hey man, you got me.' Caustic cuffed the perp and walked him to the toll booth, where he took the man's ID. His name was Michael Stewart, 25, an aspiring artist and model who was on his way home to Clinton Hill, Brooklyn, where he lived with his parents. He asked the cop not to call and wake them. According to Caustic, Stewart's disposition changed as they waited for the arrest transport van. He bolted upstairs with the officer on his heels. At the top, Stewart fell face forward on the ground. Caustic would later say, "The cop held Stewart to the ground until the van arrived. Several officers loaded the perp inside and took him to the old District 4 Transit Police Station at Union Square. By then, the collar had gone bad." Caustic said Stewart became very violent in the van. He tried to run again at Union Square, so he was hog-tied, bound at the ankles and tethered hands to feet by an elastic strap. Stewart's wails drew 24 Parsons School of Design students to their dorm windows. "Oh my God, someone help me," student Rebecca Reese heard him bellow. "What did I do? What did I do?" Police supervisors judged Stewart emotionally disturbed. They bundled him back into the van and took him to Bellevue Hospital, a mile away. Stewart was comatose by the time he arrived at Bellevue at 3:22 a.m., an hour after he was caught tagging. He lingered in a coma until he died on September 28th. Coincidentally, a congressional subcommittee had held contentious hearings in New York that summer about police brutality against minorities. Stewart's death after a routine graffiti arrest became Exhibit A. Gotham was a different place 30 years ago. More than 1,600 people were murdered in the city in 1983, triple the 2012 total. And things were about to get worse with the crack-driven crime crescendo that lasted a decade. Deserved or not, the Transit Police Department had a reputation as a foundling cousin of the NYPD. It had not kept pace with the demographic evolution in New York. 7 in 10 transit cops were white in 1983, including all 11 who had a role in Stewart case. Dr. Elliot Gross, the city's medical examiner, concluded after a 7-hour autopsy that Stewart was drunk and had died of a heart attack, unrelated to his handling by cops. Stewart's family and advocates were incensed. But then Gross announced a do-over. A month later, he changed his mind and said physical injury to the spinal cord in the upper neck had caused Stewart's death. He found swelling in Stewart's brain, scrapes and bruises on his body, still visible 2 weeks later, after the arrest, and pinpoint bleeding in his eyes, often an indication of strangulation. In spite of Gross's waffling, a grand jury indicted officers Caustic and Anthony Piscola and Henry Borner for criminally negligent homicide, assault, and perjury. 3 other cops, Sergeants Henry Hassler and James Berry, and Officer Susan Techie, were charged with perjury. At trial, in the summer of 1985, prosecutor John Fried framed the case as a classic cover-up by cops. He called nearly 30 witnesses, half of them Parsons students, including Reese. Some said they saw the cop stop Stewart. Others said they did not. None could identify any particular officer. Medical testimony perplexed the all-white jury of 4 men and 8 women. 3 doctors testified for the prosecution, and they disagreed on just about every detail. Gross contradicted him again. He said, blunt force trauma, hog tying, or intoxication might have played roles in Stewart's death. He said he'd been wishy-washy because he feared his office would look bad on the high-profile case. He was correct. Sensing failure by the prosecution to prove its case, the defense team called no witnesses, though the grand jury testimony by Kostick and others went into the trial record. The jury acquitted the 6 cops on all charges. Lewis Clayton Jones, an attorney for the Stewart family, called the trial a farce. The MTA, overseer of transit police, considered but ultimately rejected any form of discipline against those 6 cops and 5 others. Gross was canned in 1987. 3 years later, the MTA paid Stewart's family $1.7 million to settle a wrongful death lawsuit. In 1995, the transit police were folded into the NYPD. Richard Emery, a civil rights attorney who observed the case for the New York State Civil Liberties Union, called it one of the most egregious tragedies of police abuse in the city. The prevailing belief was that the cops got away with murder. Emery told the Justice story. The outcome might be different today, he said. Manhattan had thousands of surveillance cameras that might have proved evidence, and those Parsons students standing at their windows would no doubt have aimed cell phone cameras at the man screaming bloody murder on Union Square.